today. We're just going to give it another minute or two as people filter in, and then I'll get started with the presentation. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, so my name is Rachel Funk. I'm an attorney in the Elder Law Unit at Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. I'm presenting today about public benefits that are available for residents in assisted living. I want to thank everybody who's attending and anybody who's watching the recording after the fact. I do want to make sure that everyone is aware that this is being recorded so that we can broadcast it later on our YouTube channel. So I will, everyone who's attending today has the opportunity to ask questions in our chat, but please do refrain from putting in any personal details. You don't need to put in any kind of personal information about yourself to ask a general question. If you do have a more specific question, you certainly are able to call into our intake line and hopefully speak with an attorney if you're eligible for our services. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. So I will go ahead and get started. And just as a reminder, I think we'll be putting in the chat that this is being recorded. So please do not provide personal details in the chat if you have any questions, but please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. And once I'm done with the main portion of the presentation, I'll be able to review the chat and address your questions that way. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, my name is Rachel Funk. I'm a supervising attorney in the Elder Law Unit at SMERLS, which we call the Legal Advocacy for Older People Project. And today I am presenting on assisted living, public benefits that are available for residents of assisted living. To start, I'm going to give a little bit of background about SMERLS. SMERLS provides free civil legal help on critical civil legal issues in the southern part of the state of Minnesota. So we serve residents of the 33 southern Minnesota counties, and that goes as far north as Washington County, Ramsey County, and Dakota County and Carver County in the metro. So we do get up into the metro a little bit as well. Our particular project, the Legal Advocacy for Older People Project, is funded under the Federal Older Americans Act through the Minnesota State Board on Aging and the local area agencies on aging. As part of our funding, we are mandated not to means test for our services. So we do not have a criteria for folks who are in our population that they have income and assets below a certain limit to be eligible for our services. Instead, for folks who are living in our service area or have a legal issue in our service area age 60 and over, we focus on issues affecting those folks who are in the greatest social and economic need. To reach out to SMERLS directly to have your case or your legal issue looked into and either obtain advice or representation if you're eligible for our services. Telephone is still the most efficient way to connect with us. I'm sorry, I have the wrong, it's 866 actually, not 888. I apologize for that. But our intake line is 866-877-6529. And it is open from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays, excluding holidays. You can also do an intake on our website, which is where you registered for this webinar. So if you go to our website, you should be able to click on the Get Help button if you need to, and you can submit a request for our intake staff to reach back out to you. And you can also look at lawhelpmn.org, which has a lot of great information about legal issues and also has a way to connect with the legal services organization in your region. When you contact SMERLS for an intake, our first task is to confirm that you're eligible for our services. So we will ask you for certain information to make sure that you're eligible for our services, and that includes your name, your date of birth to verify your age, your telephone number so that we have a way to contact you as we follow up with your legal issue that you've contacted us about, your address and the location of the legal issue that you're calling us about, and just a basic description of the legal problem. You don't have to have a really good understanding of what's going on. We just like to have a little bit of a background on what the legal issue is. So when it gets sent on to the appropriate unit, it goes to the right place to start. For language accessibility, SMERLS employs staff who speak a number of different languages, including Hmong, Spanish, Somali, and English. If there is any other language that's your preferred language, we use Language Line to communicate over the phone. That's a free service for the clients. We don't charge clients for any kind of interpreter service, and we always use those services as needed without any kind of issue. All right, so that's kind of the background on SMERLS. And next I'm going to get into the topic for today. So today's topic is public benefits that are available for residents in assisted living. I'm going to go through a few different categories of public benefits assistance. So I'm going to talk about public benefits available for medical care costs, public benefits available for food support, income support, and rent assistance. To get some background and level setting, I want to talk about what is assisted living. Assisted living is a somewhat new entity or type of entity in Minnesota. It was created by statute a few years ago. And there's a really robust set of laws and rules that govern what an assisted living has to do to have its licensure and what it has to provide to its residents and what options it has to provide additional things to residents. So all assisted living facilities in the state of Minnesota are required by law to either provide or make available 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, weekly housekeeping, weekly laundry service, and if requested by the resident, help arranging for transportation. Those are the services that they must provide to be considered an assisted living. In addition, an assisted living is defined in the Minnesota statutes as a licensed facility that provides sleeping accommodations and assisted living services to one or more adults. So it doesn't have to be, as the kind of the graphics here demonstrate, it can be as small as just in a house, as long as there are one or more adults that are being provided with that service. And sometimes it can be a standalone facility that provides assisted living services and housing to, a number of different residents. And sometimes an assisted living is a part of a larger campus of facilities. So there are some assisted living facilities on campuses where there are independent living apartments where there are not services available. Then assisted living where there are services available and housing, and also skilled nursing facilities where that higher level of care can be obtained. So any one of those types of locations can be a licensed assisted living under Minnesota law. Let's see. Oh, well, this is a little bit, sorry, of a repeat of the earlier slide. I apologize for that, but there are some more, there's some more information here. So as I mentioned before, assisted living facilities provide or make available 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, weekly housekeeping, weekly laundry service, daily social and recreational services, help accessing community resources and social services, and help arranging transportation, again, at the resident's request. So a resident is not required to use these services at an assisted living. There's no requirement that the resident agree to accept each and every one of these services. Each assisted living offers a different set of packages that the resident can choose from. And in any given day, the resident can decide, you know what, I don't feel like getting my housekeeping this week. And that's fine. The assisted living can't force you to accept a service. You may still have to pay for that service in that package, even if you're not using it, unless there's a different package available to you. Um, there are also a whole host of different optional services in each assisted living. So the required services have to be offered for the facility to be licensed as an assisted living, but they can also offer a large number of optional services. To find the optional services that your assisted living facility provides, the best option, the best way to find that is to ask for an updated copy of the facility's Uniform Disclosure of Assisted Living Services and Amenities, which is a very long name, and so we usually call that the UDALSA. The UDALSA, the facility is required to provide to an assisted living resident when they're looking at the facility to see if they want to move in. They also have to provide a copy of the UDALSA to the resident when they're signing their paperwork to be a resident there. And so you should have it from when you've moved in, but you can also always ask for an updated copy if there have been any changes to it, or if you've lost your copy. And also the Department of Health actually has an archive where they have the most recent UDALSAs for each facility online. So you can just go to Google and Google UDALSA, the name of your facility in Minnesota, and you usually will get a result back with a PDF that you can download of the UDALSA. Some examples of optional services that an assisted living can provide are things like a secured unit, sometimes for memory care, central storage of medications, diabetic care, pain pump management, oxygen saturation checks, compression stockings, help getting those on and off, blood pressure checks, denture care, setup and cutting food at meals, nail care, ceiling lift transfers, hourly safety checks, meal tray delivery, a therapeutic diet, and help scheduling appointments. So these are all optional services. When you're looking at moving into an assisted living facility, it's really important to go through the UDALSA very carefully to make sure that they offer the services that you need. For example, if you have a pain pump and you want assistance with managing that pain pump, you should look at the UDALSA and make sure that that is a service that the assisted living that you're looking at is offering to you. If they don't offer it, I'll talk about ways that you can try to get that service covered by a waiver. But if you want it to be provided by the facility itself, that's important to look at in the UDALSA. So you just want to look through that UDALSA, and compare UDALSAs for different facilities as you're choosing where to live. Okay, so that's kind of the background. Assisted living, it's a licensed facility in Minnesota. There are some services that are required to be available to residents, and then there are a whole lot of optional services that you can get in the assisted living. So, public benefits that are available for residents of assisted living. I'm going to start by talking about medical care. There are a number of different types of medical care programs in the state of Minnesota and federally. So I'm going to talk about Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans briefly, and then I'm going to talk about the most common medical assistance waivers that I see for folks who are in assisted living facilities. So to start with, Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans. Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans do not cover the cost of services or housing in assisted living. So those services the optional services that I mentioned earlier, like help with getting your stockings on and off, food, things like that, transportation. Those are things that Medicare and a Medicare Advantage plan are typically not going to cover, almost never. It would be a very rare Advantage plan, I think, that might cover something from an assisted living service perspective. But they do cover medications, doctor's appointments, and other medical and pharmacy expenses. So when you move into an assisted living facility, or if you're a resident in an assisted living facility and you become eligible for Medicare, you can keep Medicare as long as you're at the assisted living facility, and Medicare can pay for the cost of your medical items, things like medications, doctor's appointments, and medical and pharmacy expenses. To be eligible for Medicare, there are a few different routes that you can become eligible for Medicare, which is a federal program. Everyone who is a citizen of the US or a lawful permanent resident with the proper work history is eligible for Medicare when they turn age 65. And you should receive notification from the Center for Medicare Services when you're getting close to when you can enroll in Medicare Part A and Part B. So I think you can enroll maybe 2 months in advance or 1 month in advance. I can't remember exactly, but they do send you notification. And once you're getting close to your 65th birthday, you can start enrolling. You're also eligible for Medicare if you've been a Social Security disability insurance recipient for 2 or more years. And that time period counts if you have any kind of retroactive eligibility. So a lot of times folks will apply for Social Security disability insurance benefits, and the process might take a while for them to be approved, or they might apply with an allegation that they became disabled sometime in the past. And as long as your approval goes back for at least 2 years, then you'd be eligible for Medicare right away. Otherwise, you just have to wait until you get to that 2-year time period, and then you become Medicare eligible also. There's also immediate eligibility for Medicare for folks who have end-stage renal disease or ALS. That's another way that folks can be eligible for Medicare. If you are looking into applying for Medicare or getting enrolled in Medicare, you want to contact the Social Security Administration field office in your area. Social Security administers those enrollments for the Medicare office. So you can contact your Social Security office by phone, make an appointment, and talk with them about getting enrolled in Medicare if you haven't already been enrolled in Medicare. Okay. So the kind of the bigger piece that we'll be talking about for public benefits that cover things in assisted living or for residents who are in assisted living are medical assistance waivers. And these are basically Medicaid programs in the state of Minnesota that can pay for services to allow folks with disabilities and senior citizens to live in the community and avoid having to live in a skilled nursing style institution. The point of the waivers is to provide that extra support and pay for it through the state so that folks can stay in the community rather than needing to go into an institution. So there are a number of different waivers in the state of Minnesota for different populations. I'm going to focus on two waivers that typically you would see for folks who are in an assisted living. So the first is called the Community Access for Disabled Individuals, or CADI waiver. And the second I'm going to talk about is the Elderly Waiver, or EW. For the CADI waiver, eligibility criteria are the recipient has to be under the age of 65 when the waiver is first opened. So you can keep on the CADI waiver after you turn 65, but you do have to be under 65 when that waiver first gets opened and approved and you start using it. To be eligible under the medical criteria, you need to be certified disabled by the Social Security Administration or the State Medical Review Team, or SMRT. So you may hear that sometimes. If you for example, if you have already started collecting Social Security retirement benefits and you did not collect Social Security disability benefits, then you may need to go through the State Medical Review Team process to be found to have the medical certification of disability. So typically that would be if you've gotten early retirement, because you can sometimes collect early retirement or survivor's benefits at age 62. So if you have elected for those early benefits and you haven't gotten a disability finding from Social Security, you can go through the State Medical Review Team to determine whether you have a disability to be eligible for the CADI waiver. And then you also have to do a long-term care consultation, also known as the MnChoices assessment, to determine that you have the level of care need and require the services to be able to stay in the community, which would include an assisted living. The level of care need is the nursing facility level of care, and that's just kind of a computer, the MnChoices assessment. And as I mentioned, you need to require the supports and services over and above other funding sources to be able to stay in the community. So medical assistance itself does pay for some services that can help people stay in the community. So this MnChoices assessment is confirming that you require services more than what medical assistance or some other available assistance program can pay for. And then there's also a financial component to eligibility for the CADI waiver. You either have to be on medical assistance or eligible for medical assistance financially. And that really just depends on your income, your household size, whether any of that income can be different rules, and whether you can become eligible under the spend down. So you can become eligible for medical assistance even if your income is too high with a monthly spend down. And I think I have a slide coming up about that. So we'll talk about that too. And I apologize for this teeny tiny writing, but I didn't want to use too many slides for this. Basically, I'm not going to read through everyone, but there are a whole lot of different services that you can be eligible for under CADI. You can read through this list on your own. Not all of these services are available in assisted living. It will depend on what that assisted living, optional in assisted living, and other things are not the type of thing that an assisted living can provide to you. But the way that it works when you have a CADI waiver or the elderly waiver is that if you require a service in your support plan and in your MnChoices assessment, and if that service is not available from your assisted living, you oftentimes can call an outside provider to give you that service in the assisted living. So an assisted living facility is not able to restrict the resident's ability to contract outside. And a lot of times people will, do a mix of services that they get from the assisted living and services that they get from outside the assisted living. And the CADI waiver case manager can help with that. You do also have the option of contracting out for the services that your provides to you if you're not happy with the way that they provided, or if you have a preferred provider that you would rather use. What I typically see is that folks who move into an assisted living usually would have the services from the assisted living, because that's usually why you but you don't have to. That can be, you can do kind of a bit of a la carte, basically. Okay, so elderly waiver is another waiver program that I see for a lot of folks who are living in assisted living to help pay for services. Unlike the CADI waiver, elderly waiver requires 65 or older when the waiver is first opened. So you can, if you start on the CADI waiver when you're under 65, you can switch to elderly waiver, but you don't have to, as I mentioned. But if you are already age 65 or older when you are applying for this waiver, then you'll go to the elderly waiver instead. Same thing for diagnosis. Well, no, not same thing for diagnosis medical criteria. Just by virtue of being 65 and older, you have the right kind of medical criteria, except that you still need a long-term care consultation or MnChoices assessment. Confirms you require a nursing facility level of care, and that you have a need for services that the elderly waiver can provide for less than the cost of care in a nursing home. But that those supports and services are, the need for those is greater than what's available under the typical medical assistance. So I think when you say it like that, it seems like a fine line, but there are a whole lot of people that fall within that category. of they require services that are beyond what regular, just plain old medical assistance can pay for, but they don't require so many services as costly as being in a skilled nursing. And so that is enough for you to have the level of care need to qualify for the elderly waiver. And then again, you have to be financially eligible for medical assistance or assistance. And depending on your income amount, you may have what's called a waiver obligation or a monthly payment that you make towards your care. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. For available services, again, similar to CADI, they're not exactly the same. They don't offer exactly the same criteria or the same services, but there is a lot of overlap between the CADI program and the elderly waiver program for what's available for services. And again, similar to what I was talking about with CADI, not all services are available in the assisted living, and you'll want to work with your waiver worker on exactly what is going to be available to you. There is one more program that I wanted to touch on. That is called the Alternative Care Program. So this, I don't believe that this is classified as a waiver program, but it is available to folks who are, again, age 60 and over, who require a nursing facility level of care, but the service needs that they require can be provided at a cost that is 3/4 or less of what would be paid for somebody in a similar level of need, and that they have no way to pay for services, and cost sharing is required. So I think that's a little bit confusing and hard to understand, but bottom line is that alternative care can be an option for folks who maybe do not have the financial eligibility for a waiver otherwise. That's where we tend to see it in populations that have kind of a little bit of a higher income, but not like high enough to pay for their own care. And the county does a calculation for whether the financials fall within the alternative care, and then they do a calculation to see how much the recipient of the alternative care will need to pay towards their own care. All right. Oh yeah, so I kind of talked about this, but this is a breakdown a little bit of how elderly waiver and alternative care are different. The financial eligibility, like I mentioned, is different. You can have a higher income for alternative care, but there is always cost sharing where you pay 5 to 30% of the average monthly cost of your services. An elderly waiver does not require a payment of a fee, but if you have income that's a little bit high, then you may be required to pay a waiver obligation towards your care every month. Okay, so how do you apply for the waiver? There are 3 components to applying for a medical assistance waiver. And I've written them in the order that I think you should do them here. So you don't have to necessarily do these all in the same order that I've recommended, but I think it's the best idea to request the MnChoice assessment first, because in most counties there is a wait list to be able to have an assessor come out and do the assessment. And that assessment date is going to be really important for your eligibility date. Once the MnChoice's assessment is done, that's as long as you've met the other criteria for eligibility, that's when your waiver will open. And at least in my experience, that's the part that can take the longest to get that scheduled and get that completed. Then you submit the financial application where you outline all of your different finances, and the county evaluates whether you're financially eligible. And then you can also reduce excess assets at the same time. One thing that I see happen with folks is that they're in maybe an assisted living doing private pay, which usually is a pretty high fee every month. The person gets to a point where they maybe only have enough money to pay one more month at their assisted living, or maybe not even. And that's when the person starts applying for medical assistance. That is really late to be applying. I would recommend applying well before you've actually run out of money. Like I said, the Min Choices assessment can take a while. You have to do a lot of paperwork to do the financial application, and you do get some time even after you've submitted the financial application to reduce your excess assets if you have excess assets. Sometimes by the time it's all said and done, you've already reduced excess assets by just continuing to pay at the private pay rate at your assisted living. So my recommendation would be to start the process a few months before you're projecting that you're going to be unable to pay for the private pay anymore. The Min Choices assessment is a standardized computer tool that's used statewide. It has to be completed to apply for the waiver. You don't have to pay a fee for it, so you can request it even if you're not financially eligible yet and you don't have to pay a fee. It is completed in person, either in your home or at another location if that's your preference. Interpreting gets provided to anybody who needs it at no cost. And it can be completed by a public health nurse, but it is more likely going to be completed by a certified assessor, someone who is certified to give specifically the Min Choices assessment. The law says that a Min Choices assessment is supposed to be completed within 20 days of the request. In my experience, that is kind of a goal that doesn't usually get met just because of the volume of requests. It's not really feasible for the assessors to be doing as many assessments as would need to be done in that time frame. And the assessment itself is valid for 60 days. So at the end of that 60-day period, it may need to be redone, except that it can be extended via an eligibility update within 90 days of the assessment. And starting in July of this year, so July 1st of 2025, the Min Choices assessment will be valid for a full 365 days. And hopefully that will reduce some of the backlog and reduce waiting times for people because folks won't need to be redoing their Min Choices assessment while their financial application is pending. The Min Choices assessment evaluates the person's activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living, any other kinds of supports that you get, your health needs, environmental and housing needs, behavioral needs, basically everything that the recipient needs to live a full life and have a functional life in the community. And it determines, again, the level of service need for waiver eligibility, and then also your specific service needs. So the Min Choices assessment, in addition to determining your eligibility for the program itself, also is the key tool for designing your support plan. So that will help really inform what your support plan is going to be and what the actual individual services that you're going to be eligible for is. So the Min Choices assessment is like I said, a very critical tool, and it's really important to answer the questions thoughtfully and completely when you're going through the Min Choices assessment. And it's also really important to identify in that assessment what are the types of things that you're able to do on your own, and what are the types of things you're able to do but with help, and what that help is. I think that can be really hard to focus on because you're just living your daily life and someone's just asking you, can you take a shower? And of course, you take your showers and you don't necessarily think like, I take my showers, but my son helps me unbutton because my fingers can't do the buttons or, whatever it is. So it can be really helpful to have someone there with you. If you have a family member or friend that tends to be the person that helps you, that can be nice to have them there to give a little bit of that context. Or, just take your time. I mean, the assessment is supposed to take a couple hours. So take your time to think it through, ask clarifying questions if you don't understand what the assessor is asking you, and just be sure that you're answering the questions thoughtfully and completely. At the end of the assessment, or within, I think it's within 30 days of the assessment, you should receive a copy of it in the mail and you can go through it and make sure that it's accurate. And if it's not accurate, then you have appeal rights, which I'll talk about at the end if I get to it, because I'm a little bit behind time for what I was expecting to be. Okay, so let's skip about, okay, so excess assets. The asset limit for medical assistance is $3,000 for an individual, $6,000 for a couple. But there are higher asset limits if you have a spouse who is not receiving medical assistance services. So if you have one spouse who is applying for the elderly waiver or caddy waiver, and another spouse who does not get any of those services, is not applying for those services, the spouse who's not applying for the services or getting the services is considered to be the community spouse, and they can retain a lot more in assets for them to be able to support themselves. And that changes every year. I think this year it's $154,000 or something. It's really significant, and that's over and beyond what the value of the equity in the home is. And the community spouse asset allowance is also available even if you don't live in the same place. So if you have the spouse who's seeking the services is living in assisted living, and the spouse who's not seeking services is living at the house or, in a private apartment somewhere, you can still be the community spouse. You don't have to be living in the same location. And you also don't have to be living separately. So you can have a community spouse and a long-term care spouse who are living in the same place, as long as that community spouse is not receiving services through the medical assistance waiver. Okay, so that is the very high-level, quick overview of medical assistance in an assisted living facility. The last thing that I want to mention about this is when you're looking at moving into an assisted living, not every assisted living accepts a medical assistance waiver. And a lot of the facilities that do accept a medical assistance waiver require you to be on private pay for a certain amount of time, and it depends on the place. That information should be in the facility's UDALSA. There is a section in the UDALSA that says, what assistance programs are accepted by that facility, and they should specifically say if they accept elderly waiver or if they accept the caddy waiver, and if there's a requirement for the resident to be in the facility on private pay for any particular amount of time. So I've seen 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. It really just depends on the facility. So when you're looking to apply for a facility, and if you're expecting that you're going to be applying for a waiver in the future to cover the cost of your care, you want to look very carefully at that and look at your finances and make sure that you're going to be able to meet that private pay requirement before you shift over to the medical assistance waiver. Okay. So the next category that I want to talk about for public benefits that are available for residents of assisted living is food support. So I'm going to, again, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I'm just going to do a refresher on the meal requirements for an assisted living. I'm going to talk a little bit about SNAP benefits, a little bit about the MSA special diet, and meal delivery very briefly. So again, assisted living meal requirements are that the assisted living has to make available or provide 3 meals plus snacks daily for each resident. But an assisted living is not required to provide a specialized diet or meal delivery to the resident's apartment or room, unless that's something that they disclose that they do provide in the UDALSA, and that's a service that you have contracted for. So again, you have to go back to that UDALSA and look to see, do they provide a diabetic diet? Does the facility provide a low sodium diet? All of those things are specified in the UDALSA, and you want to very carefully go through and make sure that your assisted living does have that available if you want to receive those meals from the assisted living. SNAP benefits, which was formerly called food stamps, is a federal program that's administered by the states and the counties that provides a financial monthly benefit to help pay for the cost of food. You get the monthly benefit loaded onto what's called an EBT card, and you can use that at the grocery store just like any other debit card. The amount that you're eligible for depends on your income and your household size and some of your expenses. So there's a calculation that the county does to determine exactly how much you're eligible for in SNAP benefits. Generally speaking, SNAP benefits are not available to assisted living residents, but there is an exception when the resident receives fewer than 50% of their meals from the assisted living. So you can do an opt-out from the meal plan for your assisted living, or you could do one meal a day, for example, from the assisted living and still be eligible for some SNAP benefits. If you're on a waiver, it's a really good idea to talk to your waiver worker before you opt out of meals from your assisted living, so they can work with you on figuring out if there's some other option. You can coordinate with them on those details. The SNAP benefit is not that high, so that's, I think, the potential downside of um, uh, opting out of meals from your assisted living and switching over to SNAP is that the monthly SNAP benefit, I think, is around $200 maximum. So that's, that can be pretty tight for folks who are looking for, the whole month worth of food. One other program that is available is the Minnesota Supplemental Aid Special Diet. And that is also a cash assistance benefit for low-income adults or seniors. There's a basic monthly MSA grant that I think is $81 now. You have to be financially eligible for it. And there's also something called a special needs grant for things like a medically prescribed special diet. And the amount of the benefit every month just depends on the nature of the special diet. There's a list that the state keeps track of how much they will pay depending on what the diet is. And it does have to be medically prescribed. It does have to be a diet that your doctor has prescribed for you. This doesn't quite go into the food support, but I did want to mention as well that MSA can also pay for representative payee services or guardian or conservator service fees. So if you're an assisted living resident and you're low income and you qualify for the MSA monthly benefit, even without a special diet, so that $81 grant. And if you are looking to hire an agency or an organization to help you manage your benefits from Social Security or a representative payee, the MSA grant might be able to pay the monthly fee for that representative payee. Or if the court appoints a guardian or a conservator for you and you're financially eligible for the MSA grant, the MSA might also be able to give you a special needs grant to pay the guardian or conservatorship service fees if there are any from them. So those are some other benefits that I think people don't think of when they're living in assisted living and looking for some help with managing their finances. It's always a good idea to see if you're eligible for that MSA grant and if you'd be eligible for a special needs grant to pay the cost of having a representative payee company manage your money for you. And then the last bit here is meal delivery. I don't have a lot on this slide because meal delivery, like I mentioned, is something that the facility and assisted living can sometimes provide. If it's in their UDALSA, they might be willing to or able to deliver meals to your room. But if it is something that's necessary for you as a service, then it's also possible that a waiver, either the CADI or the elderly waiver, might be able to pay for a meal delivery service for you. And again, that's something if you've opened up on a waiver, you've got elderly waiver or a CADI waiver, talk to your waiver worker about whether you might be eligible for meal delivery as part of your services through the waiver. Okay, so the last bit that I want to talk about here, before I get to any questions that we have, is rental assistance. I'm going to talk about housing support, which was formerly known as group residential housing, and MSA housing assistance, which is another one of those grants through the MSA program. To understand benefits for the cost of housing in assisted living, you have to understand that housing costs, like room and board and service costs, are completely different in assisted living. So a skilled nursing facility charges one cost for the month, and that includes all of the medical care and services and and the cost of the room like a hospital. That's not how it works in assisted living. In assisted living, you have a room and board charge and you have a service charge. Um, and a waiver, if you have the CADI waiver or the elderly waiver, the waiver can cover the service costs or, whatever amount of the service costs you're eligible for, but a waiver does not pay for the housing costs. So if you're looking for assistance in paying those housing costs, you might need to go to a different program. Um, Housing support is a program that I see folks use a lot. There's also MSA housing. Oh, and I'm sorry, I already said this. So even though the medical assistance waivers don't pay for room and board in an assisted living, typically the rent amount is capped for an assisted living resident who's on the elderly waiver and CADI. So it's usually capped at the housing support assistance grant amount. So you may, for example, be on private pay with a rent amount of, say, $3,000 a month for your unit. And then you might, if the facility accepts the elderly waiver or CADI waiver, you might switch over to that waiver when you're eligible, and your rent amount will be reduced to the housing support amount. So for right now, that amount is $1,170 a month. It goes up every year on July 1st, just depending on the cost of living. I think it's projected this year to go up to maybe 1185. I don't remember exactly. So it just goes up a little bit every year. The assisted living contract is required to include, under Minnesota state law, a description of the rent requirements for folks who are on medical assistance waivers but not receiving housing support. And I'll talk about housing support next. But so the contract that you sign with your assisted living should say, if you start receiving elderly waiver or CADI waiver or medical assistance waiver, here's what your rent is going to be. And you should read through that very carefully when you're looking to move into your facility. If you want to be able to stay there after you switch over to the elderly waiver or CADI waiver. Housing support is a more, what we kind of think of more as a housing subsidy program. It used to be called group residential housing, but for the past several years, it's been called housing support, or HS. It can only be used in specific locations. So the building where you're living has to be able to accept the housing support funding from the county. And you have to work with a provider that has a contract with the county or tribal agency. Sometimes that's the same. So sometimes your landlord and your provider are the same entity. Sometimes they're different. So sometimes you might work with a provider agency that makes the payment from the county to your landlord. And then the landlord is a separate entity that still, has an agreement to collect housing support subsidy amounts from the county. To be eligible for housing support, your assets have to be $10,000 or less. That's typically not a problem because, as I mentioned before, most folks who are on a waiver program already have to have assets that are under $3,000 for a single person, or $3,000 or under. So usually that assets are not really a big problem. And then your income has to fall under the income limits, which can be different depending on your circumstances. And some income is excluded in that calculation. The housing support generally can pay up to that maximum of the $1,170, but the amount of your assistance will just depend on what your income is. So they do a calculation to make sure that you're income eligible at all, and then to determine what the housing support assistance payment will be for you. And like I mentioned before, just to reiterate, that payment does not come to you. It goes through your provider to the landlord, or if they're the same entity, then just straight to your landlord from the tribal or county agency. Okay. Then the last program is MSA housing, and that's a monthly benefit of about $472 a month right now, and that also changes every July 1st. The amount of benefit is just half of whatever the federal SSI payment is for that year. To be eligible for MSA housing, you have to be eligible for MSA. Your housing expenses must be more than 40% of your income, not counting your MSA. You have to be under age 65 when you're applying for the MSA housing. And you have to be on medical assistance with a waiver or moving from a facility like a nursing facility to the community, or moving off of housing support, or have the medical assistance CFSS, which is what we're all shifting to from the PCA program. So that's kind of a particularized group of folks, but that's what the eligibility criteria are. And if you don't know offhand if you're eligible, I would recommend applying. Okay, last and final, I want to talk about the appeals process in these last few minutes. When you apply for a public benefit program, like medical assistance, SNAP benefits, housing support, or MSA, um, basically all of those will give you appeal rights. So if you're denied a public benefit, you have the right to appeal it to the agency that denied it. And that agency for these programs is the Department of Human Services in Minnesota. So your denial notice that you get in writing should include information about how to file the appeal and when the appeal is due. Typically, you get about 30 days to file your appeal, but there are some kind of exceptions there. The appeal has to be made in writing, and it can either be mailed, faxed, or submitted in person or online. You'll receive a copy of this presentation in your email, and I do have the link here at the top for how to submit an appeal online. You go to this link and then you fill in which agency took the action, which would be whoever sent you the letter denying it, then the date on the notice, the date that the notice says the action will happen, which for a denial is the same day. And then the reason for appeal, where you're talking about which type of benefit the appeal is about. So medical assistance, SNAP benefits. And then you can write a very brief summary of why you think it's wrong. So maybe the agency has your income wrong. Maybe they've counted your assets wrong. Maybe you're not quite sure why it's wrong, but you're pretty sure that they shouldn't have denied you this benefit. You can just write that too, that you don't think that they should have denied it to you. If you are already receiving benefits and you receive a notice that your benefits are being terminated, you can request what's called continued benefits as long as you file your appeal within 10 days of the notice or before the action takes place. And you can let the agency know that you want to keep your benefits at the same rate that they are now until your appeal is decided. There is a chance that they may ask you to pay those benefits back. So that's why you elect this if you want to. For most folks, you can't really go for the next 2 months without your benefits. You generally, it's in your interest to request continued benefits unless you feel like there's a reason you shouldn't. Okay. Ooh, coming into the home stretch. The key takeaways that I want to make sure that everyone has from this presentation is that when you're a resident of assisted living, there are a lot of different benefits programs that you might be eligible for. And so when in doubt, if you need additional support, if you're having trouble making your bills, making ends meet, apply for a benefit program. Contact your county or tribal agency, put in an application for a benefit that might help you meet your needs. And then the county or tribal agency will have to let you know whether you're eligible or not in writing, and then you can appeal it if you think they're wrong. So I always recommend applying for the benefit, even if you're not sure that you're eligible, because again, each program has different income limits, asset limits, different types of income and assets are counted and not counted. It can be very complex, and you might not know for sure that you're not eligible. So why not do the application and make sure? There are a number of different places that you can contact for information about benefits that you might be eligible for or services if you're having trouble getting some services coordinated. So Senior Linkage Line is a great resource. Anyone in the state of Minnesota can call the Senior Linkage Line. It is a free service. They are very knowledgeable about benefits programs. They're also very knowledgeable about health insurance. If you're looking at an Advantage plan and you need some help understanding it, they're a really great resource for that. Disability Hub Minnesota is another great resource for folks who have disabilities. You can contact them. They have a lot of information about a lot of different programs that are available for folks with disabilities. The Office of the Ombudsman for Long-Term Care provides advocacy services for recipients of long-term care services and residents in assisted living or skilled nursing or group home facilities. They're also a great resource. The Office for Ombudsman for Public Managed Care Organizations is a wonderful resource if you're having trouble with your managed care organization, or if you have questions about your managed care organization, like maybe you have an M-SHOW or an you might have an Advantage plan or something that has a managed care organization. They're a great resource to talk to about those problems. And then finally, the Office of the Ombudsman for Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities is a great resource for folks who are in need of services or receiving services that are mental health or developmental disability related. And all of those offices do great work. Okay, so now I'm just going to say thank you. I do have the right intake number here on this slide. I'll correct it on the earlier slide before I send it out to you. And these are how you can reach SMERLS if you have a really particular question about a legal issue that you're looking for help on. Okay, so I am going to get out of sharing my screen and I am going to try to look to see if we have any questions here in the chat. Oh, except I have shrunk everything down and I can't see the chat. Oh no. Let's see. Oh, does that work? Nope. Okay, well, I apologize for this. I am not seeing a chat. Oh, there it is. Found it. Thank you everyone for your patience. Okay, so I don't see that there are any questions in the chat. Oh, okay. When is the earliest someone moving from Minnesota to another state can request MnChoices and complete the long-term care application? That's a really good question. I don't know offhand if there is a time frame that you have to be in Minnesota before you can apply. That might be something you could reach out to the senior linkage line about. They might know, or I can also look that up in the regulations, and that can be some follow-up information that we give you. But I'm not aware of what kind of timeframes there are. And I do know folks do sometimes move like from South Dakota to Minnesota to move to a different facility. And I don't know that they have a lot of issues with that. Okay, so does the county sometimes request updated proofs with the financial application if the assessment gets scheduled farther out? Yes, they do. So if you request if you do your financial application and then you request your MnChoices assessment and your MnChoices assessment isn't going to be for another 6 or 8 weeks, the county's going to want updated financial information for that time frame until you have your MnChoices assessment, because the waiver does not open until you actually have that MnChoices assessment and the assessment determines that you have the level of care need required. That's a really good question. Are assisted living facilities flexible if someone has run out of funds and is in process of applying for a waiver? That's a really good question. That's a really hard question. And I don't know if I read it out loud very well. So the question is, are assisted living facilities flexible if someone has run out of funds and is in the process of applying for a waiver? That depends on the facility. Under federal rules, a skilled nursing is not allowed to discharge a patient who is applying for medical assistance or Medicaid. That is not the rule for assisted livings. So under the assisted living statute in Minnesota, an assisted living is permitted to move forward with a contract termination if someone has not been paying. You do have the ability to appeal that. If you've come up with a solution to that problem, you might be able to appeal it and move forward, but it really depends on the assisted living, how long they're willing to wait, if at all, before they start that process. And SMERL, the next question is, does SMERLS assist with these types of appeals? And yes, we do. We can't guarantee representation on any particular case, but assisted living contract terminations for non-payment are definitely a kind of case that we look at very closely and evaluate to see if we can represent the person on it. Those are great questions. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, it looks like we are at 3 o'clock. So I will go ahead and close out our session today. But if you do have any follow-up questions and you'd like to talk more about a specific case or anything like that, you can call our intake line and be screened for our services. And thank you again, for everybody, for attending today and for those wonderful questions.